Let's just have fun with it.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Prestige Living Podcast. So with that, who do you want to be?
Okay. Welcome to Prestige Living, your podcast in Orange County where we are delivering all of the entrepreneurs directly to your eardrums. And today, we're here with Megan Stone. Megan Stone, of the owner of the High Road Design Studio. So this is really interesting. We'll get into this. But basically, her niche is interior design for cannabis retail dispensaries. And she's done work in California, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Washington, Illinois, New Hampshire, Maryland, Oregon, and the list goes on. And she's only been around for 2 years, so she is crushing it. Megan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you very much.
So my understanding is that you've come in from Arizona just for this podcast.
Oh, we should be flattered.
This is the podcast that's allowing me to expense this trip.
Oh, nice. I like that.
Oh, we love it. We love being used. And so it's already getting a little warm in here.
I know, man. That air conditioning.
We always got to kill the AC so that you guys don't hear the humming in the background. But okay, so let's get into it. First and foremost, June 2013. What happens? Like, you have an idea? Were you stoned when you had the idea? Were you Megan Stone?
No, the idea formulated itself a few months prior. I finished design school in March of 2013, and I had been working at a dispensary here in Orange County. Your viewers probably know from a past interview, but with Orange County's Patient Care and Adrian Gonzalez. I'd been working with him since 2010, and that short amount of time actually makes me an industry veteran in the cannabis industry.
Love that.
But we'd been working together for a while. I'd been going through design school the whole time I was working at the dispensary, so knew eventually I had to figure out what I was going to be when I was going to grow up and finish school. So Adrian and I actually had several talks early in 2013 about me eventually leaving to start my business, and him and I both agreed that I would stay on through June and then part ways and go my own way. Ironically, though, OCPC, in April, we received quite a few letters from the Department of Justice and the DEA, and we fell victim to a round of raids and shutdowns. So by the time I was transitioning out into my own business, OCPC was temporarily shut down. So it was a pretty easy transition. I didn't have to leave and walk away. It was kind of a nice segue into things. But ever since June of 2013, I've been focusing on trying to elevate this cannabis industry and make it the retail experience that I think a lot of people expect it to be and are very let down when they walk into a dispensary and they realize it's not meeting their expectations.
And that's exactly what Adrian was saying when we had him in here. And loosely translated, I'm reading through in between the lines of what you're saying is he owes all of his success to you.
That's what she was saying before we started recording.
They did go out to dinner last night, so maybe that was a thank you.
A thank you to him. I appreciate him offering me a job in this industry way back in the day. I had no idea when I took a part-time bud tending job at a dispensary in 2010 that it would ever turn into anything that resembled a career, let alone something that I would get to start from scratch for myself.
And his condo looked amazing too.
Yeah,
I was going to say.
Yeah, you did his
private residence.
The interior design of his home, and I remember seeing that a couple years ago, and that looked amazing. Are you doing much of that, or is it pretty much just the retail cannabis space?
Just the cannabis space. It's too valuable of a niche right now for me to kind of diversify myself yet. I don't really have any competition. There's certainly other designers that are designing dispensaries, but they're not focusing on it or specializing in it like I am. So now's kind of my time for me to capture my business and make my name and establish myself. I do a couple residential projects here and there, but very infrequently and nothing large scale.
Well, I'm looking at your portfolio. I have it pulled up right now. And the thing I really like about it is, and you hit the nail on the head, it's so niche that when most people expect to walk into a dispensary, they're expecting like just basically minimal startup costs where there's like a case and some, like as Adrian said, Bob Marley posters on the wall, and really there's not necessarily a brains behind the operation. It's more of like they're popping up all over the place and they're just kind of slanging and banging them. So when I'm looking at all these photos of the work that you've done, it's almost like you're walking into the W or something, you know?
Yeah.
You know what? Last night I was talking to somebody about who we had coming in today, and I said, yeah, these lobbies and showrooms and stuff, they look like hotels. Or
Right.
they look like professional, medical offices that you see like in Newport Coast or something like that. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, a lot of that has to do with the difference between the California market and almost every other market that's come online. California has been working at surviving this industry since 1996. You guys were the first people who ever passed medical marijuana laws, and you did a really good job of allowing people to possess, grow, and consume it, but nothing ever
Thank
really
you.
got...
I'll
nothing
take
ever really
personal
got...
responsibility.
Yeah, nothing ever really got established as far as regulating the retail side of it. So it kind of has always been a clandestine industry here, very large clandestine industry. But when I started my business out here in Orange County in June of 2013, I realized very quickly that I needed to move to a more regulated market like Arizona, which at the time was the most highly regulated medical market. The dispensaries there were just opening up because it's really hard for entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry here to put $100,000, $200,000 into a business that, like Adrian or like OCPC or so many other dispensaries, you could lose tomorrow. You just don't have that regulation here that protects these businesses and allows them to grow and flourish. So I have to focus my efforts on the newer, more regulated markets where there's barriers to entry. You have to meet a lot of qualifications in order to be given a license. Licenses are, limited in number. So the industry in these newer states is a much different climate than what it is here in California. So you see people putting the kinds of investments into their dispensaries like my clients do because they have a much safer business model and they don't risk running into the federal government or the Department of Justice. They can really have a business that they can sustain and, a business that they have to be competitive with.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in the beginning, when someone's looking to do this and they find their space, is there like an approximate price per square foot in terms of the design work that's included? Does it vary all over the place? Or could you say, hey, if you've got a 2,000 square foot place, you can expect to spend X on the design?
There is no rule of thumb, and I get asked that all the time. But it varies from market to market. A lot of it depends on the regulations. Every single project I do is different. Projects in Phoenix are limited to the amount of square footage you can have. My clients in Illinois aren't allowed to have any sort of displays or samples of products. So that turns the whole retail design kind of upside down. How do you create a retail space if you can't look at what you're trying to purchase?
Exactly.
Right.
So every project is different. It also depends, like any commercial tenant improvement project, how is the space when it starts out? Do we have to bring it up to code? How much architectural and engineering is needed to get it there? So there's so many moving parts aside from just picking out the aesthetics that go into retail design. Retail design is so much more about setting up a space for profitability and for consumer behavior, psychographics, and making the space help you sell things versus just making it something beautiful. And that's really where I've been able to specialize. I know cannabis retail intimately from being a patient and a bud tender and a dispensary manager, so I know how these spaces have to operate. Just like if somebody was going to go in and design a restaurant, they need to know how the kitchen works, how a server does their job, where they need to have hostess stands and serving stations, and how you lay out a dining room. If you can squeeze an extra chair in a dining room in a restaurant, that's an additional 20 to 30 grand a year in revenue for a restaurant owner. So commercial design is awesome because there's such a business side to it and there's such an equation to it to justify why you want to do it right and why you want to really focus on it and put an investment in it.
So it's not just like, oh, that looks pretty there, I'm going to put that there.
Exactly. Retail design is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Just retail merchandising, how you set products up to be displayed alone is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So that's kind of what I'm trying to bring to the cannabis industry, getting people to think like retailers and not like glorified drug dealers.
Right. Have you been able to measure that at all? Like saying, say for example, in Phoenix, you did some sort of display or some sort of setup in the lobby that yielded X percent of revenue increase, and then you said, oh, I want to duplicate that and do that in Illinois too, to see if it works in that market. I mean, has there been anything quantified to that extent where you've been able to say, because like for example in the retail space, like you go to an electronics store and there's end caps, you know, vendors pay good money for that because if a consumer sees it on the end cap, or if they see it near the cash register or whatever, there's a higher likelihood that they'll purchase. Is there anything like that strategy wise that's happened?
I'm trying really hard to start to put my fingers on those numbers because I know they're there, and having those numbers I think is good for our industry as a whole. Those were things I noticed though just working in a dispensary on a daily basis. I remember a couple years back when I was at OCPC, we got a new product line of high-end capsules and oils and tinctures, and we started off displaying them in a glass case. They didn't sell. We thought it was the price point. We weren't really sure. So one day I moved them up behind a shelf that's right behind the bud tenders. So they're right in people's line of sight. They're very easy for the bud tender to talk about while they're, you know, weighing out the patient that they're working with. It made the ask so much easier for the patient, and it made the sale so much easier for the bud tender. And so just proper product placement increased the sale. I mean, we went from selling none of that to that being one of our most popular lines of extracts. So it's just like in any retail space, it's all about product placement and adjacencies and order and, you know, kind of knowing the needs of your customer and how they shop for things.
Yeah, that makes total sense, because I remember seeing like there's a whole science behind, like, you know, talking about restaurants, like menu design, like where you put certain things on menus, you know, where people's eyes go. So I totally, like, why wouldn't that apply to your industry?
Yep. Just like going through, you know, a buffet line at lunch. You typically don't want to pick out your chips before you know what your entree is going to be. So there's, you know, in retail design, and it's really, it's psychology. There's an order to the way people want to purchase things. You know, you don't want to pick out the belt before you pick out the suit, but selling somebody the belt after they bought the suit is going to increase your margin and make that person happier walking out the door.
Okay, so this brings up an interesting point, because if you're hired to go in and design a lobby and more or less when the job has been complete, are you still involved after the fact? Because like the business growth, for example, does this work or does that work? You're still involved even at that point after the project is over?
That is becoming a need that I see in the marketplace that I would love for my business to start providing. I have had to, you know, when I first started this 2 years ago, I was just hoping people would let me come in and decorate their dispensaries. And now as I've gotten more experience and I see the full range of services these people need, especially in these more sophisticated markets, you know, I am now trying to position my business to be a lot more full service. So for us to really be able to come on board during the site selection process when they're looking for real estate, all the way through construction administration, and then being able to provide services beyond that, you know, regular merchandising, upkeep, even marketing. Those are things I would love for my business one day to provide, but I'm still pretty much a one-woman shop. I've got a team of subcontractors behind me that I shop my work out to, my design work, my graphic design work, my production, and things like that. But it's all happening pretty fast, and this industry changes on a weekly basis. So I'm really quickly seeing more opportunities the more I dive into these markets.
Yeah, that was my next question. I was going to say, so is the High Road, is that a one-woman show, or yeah?
It has been mostly. Last year I had an intern working with me, you know, really until 2013 and 2014 were slow. It takes a good 3 to 5 years in any industry for a design business to get off the ground. It's probably not far off from, you know, the pipeline it takes to establish as a realtor. But it was a long time. This was an industry that had never been sold design services before, that never, you know, really focused on the retail side of it. You know, everybody thinks the money's there to be made on the cultivation end of it. So the retail is just the thing, the other license you get when you get a license to cultivate in a lot of people's minds. So I had to really develop a dialogue, a knowledge, an awareness of these services. And then it was funny because as soon as January 3rd, 2015 hit, my phone hasn't stopped ringing. So this year I've really had to focus on finding good partners. I started working with her in March. I found a designer who's based out of Scottsdale as well. She's been doing hospitality, restaurant, timeshare, resort design for about 25 years. Super experienced lady, very talented, brilliant, and her and I have teamed up now so that I bring all the expertise from the cannabis industry to it. I kind of develop the business for us. She does a lot of the production work, a lot of the specifications, a lot of the code work. So I'm slowly building out my team. I don't want to get too big because I don't care to be a really big business. Yeah. I would rather stay small and boutique and selective with the clients I work with than get into the complexities of really having a firm.
With that being said, has there been anybody that you've turned down, like that come to you, or do you?
The ones I've had to literally turn down just weren't feasible projects.
They're trying to sell weed out of their car.
Yeah.
And they want you to design the interior.
Yeah, what do you think about fuzzy dice on my rearview mirror?
Yeah. A lot of people, again, because of there's not a lot of experience with this kind of service and some of my clients, a lot of it just doesn't end up being a good fit for what they were expecting to have to invest. Again, a lot of people think they're hiring me to help them pick their paint colors and their posters, and they don't realize that, we're kind of a full service team.
And there's a science behind it.
Yeah, the color I pick on your wall is not going to do anything for you if everything else around it is
Sucks.
wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm really stoked to see how the business works and the anatomy of the whole process and whatnot. I'm also really curious to know the jumping off point. I mean, you said it yourself, there's not really much of an industry around this. I mean, there's no competition in that regard, right? So it's not like you can be a copycat and tweak the business model a little bit and it's going to work. Instead, you're kind of just going out there and doing what you think's going to work. So in 2013, in June, when you launched this thing, this was basically your sole source of income, correct?
Yeah.
So tell me,
there's a story in there somewhere. I can hear it.
Tell me about that. I mean, when you got started on this, everyone's got either a mortgage to pay or rent to pay, car payment, whatever.
Yeah.
There's certain liabilities and expenses every month that you're signed up for, and more often than not, people are afraid to make the leap because they're scared they're not going to be able to adhere to what their obligations are.
Yeah. I never had dreams of being a business owner and entrepreneur. I got to a point where I just realized I had to do something in the cannabis industry. I also loved design and had learned through OCPC, in my experience there, that the cannabis industry was going to be the next craft beer industry, the next boutique wine industry, hopefully the next yogurt shop on every corner of Main Street someday. And that was just obvious to me. Late 2012 was when Washington and Colorado voted to legalize recreational marijuana. So that was a huge step in the right direction too. I really deep down knew that specializing in designing these spaces was something somebody someday was going to do. I looked for firms and other designers first who were already focusing on this, and looked hard because, again, I never wanted to do this on my own. Neither of my parents were entrepreneurs. I have a business degree, but I remember being a senior in college and having no idea what the entrepreneurial studies courses were about. I didn't know what an entrepreneur was when business was just never on my radar. I was always more of an academic than I was a business person. But when I realized that nobody was out there focusing on this and that I did know something that people didn't, my motivation for starting this was knowing that somebody else would do it if I didn't. So I self-funded. I took very small amount of money out of some investments and naively thought that I could live off of that for 6 months, and by then I would have some sort of income. Also, living in Orange County, there were huge expenses just to living here that didn't really fit in with my business. So that was another reason I moved to Arizona. Cost of living, the ease of running a business, the business climate there, the potential for customers and clients there versus in a market like California. But it was a long time coming.
What did your parents think they're both now entrepreneurs, so saying I'm going to own my own business one day is already crazy, but to say, and also it's going to be solely dependent upon designing weed locations.
When you dress it up like that.
I give my parents so much credit. I have the most supportive, amazing parents ever. They live back in Minnesota, so this whole world is pretty foreign to them. But, ever since I took a job bud tending in a dispensary, they've always been supportive, and they've always been of the stance of, well, it's legal where you are, so that's okay. But, they were supportive as best they could be. And still are to this day, always my biggest fans, always super awesome. And definitely, were there a lot when I wanted to quit and didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel anymore. And they were definitely the ones many a time that reminded me to keep going. And
tell us about that. So a time where you were thinking it's time to throw in the towel, or this isn't going to work, or something like that. Yeah. I
never equated the value of getting a paycheck as much as I think I needed to. It took, 2014 was a very long year. I landed my first client at the end of 2013. So within 6 months, I had my first full-scale dispensary. I met the client at the National Marijuana Business Conference in November. Eric Briones from Minerva Cannon Group in Albuquerque.
Shout out!
Yeah. He was an existing dispensary owner, but looking to move from about a 500 square foot space into a big 3,100 square foot building, and he wanted to do this cannabis mall concept. So he had a lot of the ideas, but didn't know how to pull it together and pull it off right. So we met. He hired me in December, finished that project up in March or April, and that was really kind of my showpiece. But then after that, it was several months before I landed anything else of substance. And I had no idea how much getting a paycheck helps to qualify your self-worth and your self-esteem and your self-confidence. When you go for a long time without getting paid, but you're still working really hard, it's hard to feel like you're valued. It's hard to feel like you've been productive, and it's hard to feel like your worth is still there. So there were a lot of mental angles to being an entrepreneur that were way more difficult than I ever thought. It's probably like being a parent. People can give you stories and give you advice, but until you're actually running a business on your own with no blueprint and no example of what to do, and in an industry that changes every day, and all of your friends in the industry doing what they're doing are in the same boat, it's very trying. It's very trying. But I can honestly say now that when I stop and think about how it's only been 2 years, I'm incredibly grateful. The cannabis industry just changes so fast. We always call it dog years. You spend a year in the cannabis industry and it feels like 7. You run into people you met 6 months ago and you feel like you've been friends for life because, so much happens in 6 months. So I think every single friend of mine since I started my business, I've told them I would not recommend going out on your own until you really, really are comfortable, or you have a business plan put together, which was something I never did, or you have capital behind you, or you have somebody to do it with. That's been the hardest thing for me too, is doing this pretty much alone. I had no idea how social and extroverted I was until I worked from home with really no peers. And that was a huge adjustment, is, not talking to 150 people a day that you're selling pot to, or, having employees to manage, people to go see every day. So those were some of the big challenges, probably being, pretty naive when I started this as far as what I needed to really get it going properly, adjusting to, being independent and being, out there on my own. But when it starts to happen, that's when it finally all feels worth it.
Megan, I want to ask you, in the beginning, you said you got your first client at the end of 2013, but you also worked with Adrian. What did your, I would assume you had a limited portfolio at that point of your work. What did your presentations look like, or how did you pitch yourself to potential clients with a limited, sample of what your work was like?
Yeah, that was another really smart move.
Just trust me, I can do it.
Yeah, that was a huge fear of mine, was the fact not only did I not really have a portfolio, but I didn't have any professional photography of the work I had done at Orange County's Patient Care. I had cell phone photos. So
sounds like some realtors we know.
Yeah. So immediately when I started my business, I took the route of, again, creating the dialogue. I went around and interviewed existing dispensary owners in states like Arizona and Colorado who had done a really good job with their design, and kind of used those projects as examples. That's how I initially met the folks over at TrueMed, my current boyfriend included. I found TrueMed on Weed Maps one day, a month after I started my business, sitting, in my office here in Orange County, and as well as a couple other shops out there in Arizona. So hopped in my car, called them up, made some appointments, sat down, talked with them, asked them about, why they chose to invest in design and how it's panned out for them, and, what it meant. And, that was kind of how I started kind of establishing myself. I also worked with the Cannabis Career Institute, which was kind of a traveling roadshow, pay $300 and come spend a Saturday with us, and we'll give you some basics on how to start a cannabis business. So I was a presenter and, teacher there for a few months. That helped kind of establish my credibility. But, I think a lot of what helped was that I was able to talk to business owners about their business in a way that, most outside consultants couldn't, and show them some ways to make it better. For a designer, having portfolio work is everything. So the photos, once Minerva was photographed, I didn't have new portfolio work for over a year after that, but those Minerva photos have appeared internationally in publications. That was really what helped, was getting one project under my belt and photographed. It was such a newsworthy story because it's cannabis, it's design, it's people doing something different in this industry. It's a women-owned business. It just kind of caught on. So luckily, that one first project I had went well enough that it was able to kind of sustain me and help me build my credibility until project number 2 came along almost a year later. So it was a long time in the process. I did finally, summer of 2014, started working, just to kind of keep myself busy. I went to work in the TrueMed cultivation facility. So I wanted to stay, I figured if I was going to get a part-time job, which I know a lot of entrepreneurs have to do in the beginning, I wanted to at least keep it within the industry. So I got involved on the cultivation end, which was actually really valuable, because to be able to speak both sides of the business and have some awareness on that whole part of the industry served me really, really well. And I learned a ton about the plant that, I had no idea about. So to have an understanding of, now how it really goes from seed to sale was a pretty awesome opportunity.
That's awesome. So yeah, you're really well versed not only on the design side, but also the product itself and the whole start to finish of the retail space for the sales. What's next for High Road Design Studio?
2015 is kind of taken care of now. Photos just came out of a lot of the projects I've done for TrueMed Dispensary in Phoenix over the last year. So that's been really fun. We've got some press releases coming out on that in the next week. I have a project up outside of Steamboat Springs, a little rec shop that's called Park Range Recreationals, and they're set to open in August. And that's going to be one of my favorite projects to date so far. A really great team of clients on that one. It's a small little Main Street shop. It's one room, about 500 square feet. So we were really able to put some nice finishes, some nice design elements in there. That's going to be a fun project to see come to life too. Minerva, my first big client, he just opened a second space in Las Lunas, New Mexico. So I got to kind of go help him create what he calls Mini Minerva. That project opened about a month ago too, so I'm excited to go see that incarnate. Then I've got a project building out in Illinois that should be open by the end of the year. I'm working on a big dual medical rec shop in Denver, which will probably be my largest project to date once that's finished. We're custom designing all the millwork and display cases on that. We're doing some really awesome environmental graphics in there. That's going to be a really neat project. So I'm just excited to finally see all these babies be born. And there's some conferences. I'm speaking at the International Retail Design Conference again in September out in Austin. So I'm just kind of looking forward to enjoying the rest of this year.
Congratulations. You're busy.
Yeah, it's a fun time. It definitely feels like, things are moving in the right direction.
Are you sharing any of this stuff on Instagram, like photos of the work?
Instagram, because of the whole square, it's hard to share interior design photos on there. I share everything on Facebook, definitely. My website, we keep up to date with my portfolio work.
What's your website?
My website is thrdesignstudio.com. So you can see all of our portfolio work, all of our press coverage on the website there. Instagram we keep it up fairly well, but it's definitely probably more product shots than design shots.
Okay, so for the people who are listening to this, they can check you out at thrdesignstudio.com.
Yes.
Okay, the High Road Design Studio. And then so you do have an Instagram handle then?
Yes, at THR Design Studio.
Okay, that makes things easy.
Same with Twitter, and I believe same with Facebook.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Megan.
You guys are welcome.
Extremely insightful. And again, for you guys listening, check it out, Megan Stone, the High Road Design Studio. It's thdesignstudio.com. You can check out all these photos too. They're awesome. So hopefully you get some clients out of this.
And she's expensing this trip, so she should just expense our lunch that she's going to take us out to.
Yeah. That sounds perfect. All right, cool.
Works for me.
Thanks so much, Megan.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
If you would like to be on the Prestige Living podcast or know someone that would be a great guest, go to www.prestigelivingpodcast.com. We'd love to hear your story.